You ever see a man so sure of his badge that he forgets the world doesn't spin around it? That's exactly what happened one humid Tuesday night in downtown Atlanta when Officer Dale Henderson spotted a lone black man leaning against a nondescript sedan in front of a closed corner store. The flickering neon sign above the shop had already gone dark, its hum replaced by the steady buzz of a nearby streetlight, the kind that drew in every moth in the county. The sidewalks were empty, the street quiet except for the distant thump of music from a bar a few blocks over. It was the kind of night where nothing should have happened except. Henderson's ego was itching for action. Dale Henderson had been on the force for 12 years, and in his own mind, that made him untouchable. He was the type of cop who thought the uniform made him king of every street he patrolled. A balding man in his 40s with a belly that had begun to press uncomfortably against his belt, Henderson carried himself like a bully on the playground always, searching for someone smaller, someone quieter, someone who wouldn't fight back. Tonight, his eyes locked on a man who seemed to fit that role perfectly. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in dark jeans and a gray jacket. He leaned casually against the sedan, scrolling through his phone as if he had all the time in the world. What irked Henderson immediately was the man's calmness. He wasn't shifting nervously, wasn't glancing over his shoulder, wasn't even pretending to be intimidated by the officer's cruiser slowing to a crawl across the street. That calmness was almost insulting to Henderson, as if this stranger didn't recognize who had just arrived, with a grunt. Henderson parked and climbed out, slamming the door harder than he needed to. His boots crunched on the gravel, and he made a point of clicking on his flashlight, sweeping the beam directly into the man's face. The sharp light washed over calm brown eyes that blinked once, twice, and then narrowed slightly, not in fear but in mild annoyance. "Hey," Henderson barked, puffing out his chest as though the sound alone should establish dominance. "What do you think you're doing out here? Place is closed." The man didn't move at first, finished whatever he was doing on his phone, slid it smoothly into his pocket, and then raised his eyes to meet Henderson's. His voice, when it came, was even controlled, just waiting. That answer did nothing to soothe Henderson. In fact, it irritated him more. He wanted excuses, fumbling, guilt something he could twist into probable cause. Not this steady, unapologetic tone. "Waiting, huh?" Henderson sneered, circling the car as though he were a predator closing in on prey. "At midnight, in front of a closed store? You selling something? You look like the type." The insult hung in the air. The man didn't flinch, didn't argue. His silence wasn't submissive, was dangerous. The kind of silence that made Henderson's gut twitch with unease. But Henderson was too arrogant to listen to that instinct. He pressed on. "License and ID." Now he demanded, jabbing a finger toward the man. The man's brow furrowed slightly, a question flickering in his eyes. His voice, still calm, carried a subtle weight. On what grounds? That single question struck Henderson like a slap. His authority was being challenged. He hated that. His face flushed red, and his hand dropped instinctively to rest on his holster, not drawing his weapon, but making sure it was noticed. "On the grounds that I said so," he snapped.
"Unless you want to spend the night in county, you better cooperate." Right.
Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The tension between the two men stretched tighter with every second. Then the man spoke again, slower this time, each word deliberate. "You sure you want to go down this road, officer?" That tone was unlike anything Henderson had heard from a civilian before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't deference. It was command, chilling and loaded with the weight of experience. For a split second, Henderson hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to back off, but his pride roared, louder. He wasn't about to be shown up by some stranger on a dark street. "Yeah, sure," Henderson spat, pushing through his uncertainty. "Now let's see that ID before I put you in cuffs." The man's lips twitched into the faintest smirk, not of amusement, but of someone who knew far more than Henderson ever could. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket. Henderson's pulse jumped, and his hand clamped tighter around his holster. Every muscle in his body tensed, adrenaline firing off alarms. The movement was steady, intentional, and Henderson was 2 breaths away from drawing his gun. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a slim, well-worn leather wallet. He flipped it open with practiced precision and angled it toward the flashlight beam. The gold badge caught the light gleaming. Like a sunrise. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Marcus Cole, the man said, his voice steady as stone. And you, Officer Henderson, are about 3 seconds away from making the dumbest mistake of your career. The words landed with the force of a hammer. Henderson's jaw slackened, his confidence splintering in an instant. His flashlight wavered, beam jerking slightly as his hand trembled. His mind scrambled, desperate to make sense of the situation. FBI here? This guy? Marcus Cole slipped his badge back into his jacket with unhurried calm. His eyes never left Henderson's, and in them was a kind of quiet authority Henderson had never encountered before. It wasn't the bluster of a patrol cop or the bark of a sergeant. It was colder, sharper, the presence of someone who had stared down men far more dangerous than Henderson and walked away without blinking. For the first time in a long while, Henderson felt small. His badge suddenly felt like cheap tin compared to the weight of what Cole carried. The night that had started as just another chance to flex his authority had shifted into something else entirely, something that would scar his pride long after the streetlights stopped buzzing. And in that tense silence, with the air thick between them, Henderson realized he'd picked the wrong man to harass. The night went silent, and it was the kind of silence that felt heavy, suffocating, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Henderson stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the badge he'd just seen, his ego scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't leave him humiliated. He could feel the sweat starting to pool under his collar, a bead sliding down, though. Back of his neck, the streetlight above them hummed louder, or maybe that was just the pounding in his ears. He tried to muster some confidence, forcing his voice out, but it came rough, uneven. "Oh well, you can't just hang around like this," he stammered, eyes darting between Marcus Cole's unreadable expression and the sedan that suddenly seemed less suspicious and more like it belonged exactly where it was. You should have identified yourself sooner." Cole tilted his head slightly, studying the man in front of him the way a teacher studies a failing student. The faintest smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, though his voice stayed calm, even measured. "That's not how this works. You don't get to barge in, harass people, and then pin your mistake on them. I gave you a chance to act professional. You failed." The words cut deep, though Cole hadn't raised his voice. Henderson felt it like a gut punch, like he was standing trial in front of a jury of one who saw straight through him. He tried to puff himself back up, tried to grab hold of the authority that seemed to be slipping out of his hands. His voice rose, cracking slightly with forced bravado. "Look, I was just doing my job." "No," Cole interrupted, sharp as a blade, slicing right through the excuse. The single syllables snapped Henderson's attempt at recovery in half. Cole stepped closer, not aggressively, but with a kind of quiet dominance that pulled the air toward him. "You weren't doing your job. Or doing your job means protecting people, not profiling them. Doing your job means knowing the law, not abusing it. Doing your job means understanding that your badge isn't a weapon for your ego." Each phrase landed like a strike. Henderson flinched visibly, his flashlight beam shaking in his hand, the circle of light jittering across the pavement. His throat tightened, but he swallowed hard and tried again. "Hey, I didn't know who you were." You can't expect." "Me too, just assume." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You don't get it. You weren't supposed to know who I was. That's what undercover means. But what you should have known is that a man standing quietly next to his car doesn't deserve to be treated like a criminal just because your ego told you to flex. That's where you went wrong." The words landed heavier than the badge ever could. Henderson's chest tightened. He wanted to shout back, to grab hold of the authority that had always shielded him, but every attempt crumbled before it left his mouth. Cole's calmness was unnerving, like staring into the eyes of someone who lived in a different league altogether. Cole didn't stop there. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering, more intimate but infinitely more dangerous. "You know what I was doing here tonight, Officer Henderson? I was in the middle of an undercover operation. Months of work. Layers of surveillance. teams waiting for my call, and you. You just came blundering in with your chest puffed out. Risked the entire mission because you couldn't control your own arrogance. Henderson's heart dropped into his stomach. His pulse pounded harder. He glanced around the quiet street, suddenly feeling exposed, as though invisible eyes were watching, judging, waiting to see what he did next. His voice cracked when he tried to defend himself. "I undercover?" "I didn't know." Cole straightened up, his full height casting a shadow over Henderson that the streetlight only emphasized. His voice was steady, controlled, but under the calm was steel. "Of course you didn't know. You weren't supposed to. But that didn't stop you from escalating, from reaching for your weapon like you were itching for a fight. Do you realize what that could have done? One wrong twitch, one misplaced ounce of pride, and you'd have been plastered across every news station in the country as the cop who shot an FBI agent. Think about that. Think about what would have happened to your career, to your department, to your name." The image seared itself into Henderson's brain. For a terrifying moment, he saw it all play out. The flashing lights of cameras, disciplinary hearings, the suspension, the disgrace. His name dragged through the mud, his pension gone. His family ashamed. He felt it like a weight crushing his chest. Cole's voice softened, but only slightly, and that softness made it worse. "You think this badge," he said, tapping his jacket where his FBI credentials rested, "makes me untouchable. But it doesn't. I still answer to people higher than me. I'm accountable. You? You walk around thinking nobody can check you? That this city is your kingdom, that stops tonight." Henderson's face burned hot. He wanted to fight back, wanted to salvage some shred of dignity, but the words just wouldn't come. His throat felt dry as sandpaper. He could only stand there, his flashlight beam trembling, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. Cole took another step forward, his presence filling the empty street like thunderclouds rolling. "You know what happens if I report this? Your department will have the bureau crawling all over them. Internal affairs will tear through every corner of your career with a magnifying glass. Every complaint you ever shrugged off, every questionable stop, every moment you thought nobody was watching, they'll dig it up. You'll be lucky to keep your uniform, let alone your badge." Henderson's stomach twisted into knots. He swallowed hard, panic seeping into his veins. His voice came out weak, pleading. "Listen, we can work this out. No harm done, right? Nobody has to know." Cole's smirk returned, but it wasn't amused. It was cold, sharp, a predator's smile. "No harm done? You threatened to? Cuff me. You profiled me. You nearly drew on a federal agent, and now you want to act like this was nothing? Tell me, officer, if our roles were reversed, if I had pulled this stunt on you, would you be as forgiving?" Henderson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His silence was damning. His excuses, his bravado, his entire shield of authority had cracked wide open, leaving him exposed for what he really was. He wanted desperately to rewind, to undo the choices that had led to this, but there was no going back. The night was etched in stone, and Marcus Cole was the one holding the chisel, the weight of it all pressed down harder than any courtroom gavel. For the first time in years, Officer Dale Henderson felt the real fragility of his position. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't above the law. He was standing on thin ice, and Special Agent Marcus Cole had just made him hear it crack. And the worst part? Henderson knew that Cole wasn't bluffing. He wasn't just some civilian with complaints. He was the kind of man who could pick up a phone and unravel Henderson's career with a single call. That realization hollowed him out, left him standing. There not as a man of authority, but as a man who had just been schooled completely. Utterly and without mercy, Cole let the silence hang, and it was suffocating. The kind that presses against your chest, makes every breath feel heavier, forces you to acknowledge the weight of the moment. Henderson shifted on his feet, trying to steady his nerves, but nothing about his posture looked steady anymore. Flashlight trembled in his hand, and though he tried to keep his face blank, the sweat trickling down his temple betrayed him. He had faced drunk drivers, angry husbands, even rowdy bar fights, but nothing ever left him feeling like this stripped, bare, smaller than the uniform he wore, his authority dismantled in seconds. Cole didn't move for a while. He just studied the officer, eyes sharp, his presence almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but the quietness made it worse. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't bluster. It was calm, steady, surgical, like a man so used to being in control that raising his voice was unnecessary. "Here's the deal," he said. "I don't have time to bury you tonight. I have work to do real work that actually makes people safer. But understand this, your career is hanging by a thread. You've got one chance to fix yourself before someone with less patience than me decides to pull it." The words echoed. Henderson nodded quickly, far too quickly, eager to agree with anything that might spare him. "Yeah, I understand," he stammered, but even as he said it, his own voice betrayed the hollow sound of a man who had never really been forced to listen until now. But Cole wasn't done. He stepped forward, closing the gap until the flashlight's beam illuminated the hard set of his jaw, the coldness in his eyes. His words came sharper now, low enough that only Henderson could hear, though the quiet street made every syllable ring like a bell. "Men like you are the reason people don't trust the badge. You think it gives you power when all it should give you is responsibility. You walk around flashing it like a weapon, looking for respect you haven't earned. But respect doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from restraint. It comes from service. You've forgotten that." Each word burrowed deep. Henderson wanted to argue, wanted to spit out some excuse, but every attempt dried up before it. Left his throat. He knew Cole was right. He'd worn the uniform like armor for too long, used it as a shield to cover the insecurities that had gnawed at him for years. And now, standing here in the shadow of someone who embodied real authority, he could feel that shield cracking. Cole's eyes narrowed, and his tone sharpened. "I've seen men like you all over this country. Some of them learn, they take the hit, swallow their pride, and they change. Others, they double down. They think they're invincible. And those are the ones who end up on the front page, their careers in ashes, their names spat on by the same community they swore to protect. Which one are you going to be, Henderson?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It demanded an answer. Henderson's mouth opened, but the words tangled on his tongue. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. His silence stretched out, heavy and awkward, until Cole finally straightened, his expression hardening further. "You're not ready to answer," Cole said flatly, "and that's fine, because life has a way of forcing answers out of men who think they can avoid them. But remember this night, officer. Remember me. Remember the moment you realize that your badge doesn't make you the biggest man in the room." Cole stepped back, sliding his badge into his jacket with deliberate calm. Then he turned toward his sedan. The way he moved was steady, unhurried, like a man who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove it. Henderson watched, frozen in place, the humiliation burning through his veins. His flashlight wavered, useless now, a symbol of authority that felt laughably small. The sound of the sedan's door opening broke the silence. Cole slid into the driver's seat, his every movement precise, controlled. Engine rumbled too. Life, its low hum filling the street. Henderson stood there, still rooted to the spot, still trying to find some way to salvage himself. But nothing came. The man he had tried to intimidate had dismantled him without ever raising his voice. Cole rolled down the window before pulling away. His eyes locked on Henderson one last time, and his final words were quieter than before, but they carried the weight of finality. "Next time, officer, the world won't be so forgiving. Don't test it." The window slid up, and the sedan pulled smoothly away, its taillights glowing red as it disappeared into the distance. Henderson watched until the car turned a corner and was gone, swallowed by the night. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, Henderson just stood there under the buzzing streetlight, his flashlight still clutched in his sweaty hand. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and the truth gnawed at him with a sharpness he couldn't shake. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't the man he thought he was. The image of that badge kept flashing in his mind. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Marcus Cole. And with it, it's the memory of those words. "Men like you are the reason people don't trust the badge." They circled his thoughts like vultures. Picking at the rotting carcass of his pride, he thought about the people he'd stopped over the years. The ones he'd treated with the same arrogance he'd shown tonight. Faces blurred together, but the shame grew sharper with each one he recalled. How many had walked away with resentment? How many had lost trust in the system because of him? The realization settled like lead in his gut. The irony twisted the knife. Even deeper, Henderson had always seen himself as the authority on the street, the man who decided what was right, what was wrong, who belonged, and who didn't. But tonight proved he was just a man with a badge that could be stripped from him as easily as Oli. Cole had stripped away his pride. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a shaky hand and tried to steady himself. But nothing about him felt steady anymore. The flashlight dimmed as its battery drained, its glow fading, just like the illusion of power Henderson had clung to for so long. A dog barked in the distance again, same one from earlier, but now the sound felt different, like a reminder of the world moving on, uncaring, while Henderson stood stuck in place. He finally forced himself back to his cruiser, sliding into the driver's seat with a weight in his chest that pressed harder than any bulletproof vest. For the first time in years, Henderson drove his route without feeling proud of the uniform. On his back, every streetlight he passed seemed to throw his reflection against the windshield, showing him a man stripped of excuses. A man who had just been schooled by someone who didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten, didn't need to flaunt power because real authority spoke for itself. And deep down, Henderson knew he would never forget it. That night, one arrogant cop learned the hard truth. Sometimes the badge on your chest isn't the biggest in the room. Sometimes the law is standing right in front of you, calm and unshaken, teaching you that your pride is nothing compared to real accountability. And for Officer Dale Henderson, the lesson burned into his pride forever. He walked away humiliated, but changed because, no matter how much he tried, he could never erase the memory of being put in his place by Special Agent Marcus Cole. It was a night that ended without cuffs, without violence, without the usual chaos Henderson thought to find. His job. But it ended with something far more lasting. The realization that power without integrity is nothing. And arrogance has no place behind a badge. That was the night Henderson understood he wasn't untouchable. That was the night he was schooled, and he never forgot it.